Hi, I'm Mary Morrissey, author of two best-selling books, No Less Than Greatness and Building Your Field of Dreams, which became a PBS special. I'm glad you're here. Our topic over the next few minutes is mindfulness. Mindfulness as a practice is thousands of years old on our planet. The Buddhists have practices for mindfulness. The Hindus have practice for mindfulness. The Christians have centering prayer, practices for mindfulness. So what is mindfulness? Mindfulness is the ability to notice what you're noticing. The ability to notice being alive, to notice I'm taking a step, to notice the feeling of my child's hand in my hand, to notice the flower that's blooming right in front of me, or the feeling of the sun coming down, or the rain on my cheeks. It's being present enough to really notice being alive. And there are some very simple but highly effective practices that you and I can practice that immediately put us into an experience in our daily life that is more than we're used to. Americans particularly, but people all over the world today, report more than ever before feeling overwhelmed by busyness. There's so many electronics, so many things coming at us, and the speed with which our brain has to sort the amount that's coming at us. You actually have to make more decisions today in 24 hours than your foreparents 100 years ago made in 1 year. When you go to an athletic store to buy a pair of shoes, athletic shoes, when I was a kid, we had one kind we got. They were called Keds, and you put them in your gym locker. And today, with the number of providers of athletic shoes, we're just talking one part of life, athletic shoes, the number of providers, the number of different kinds of athletic shoes they provide, whether they're basketball or running or air or flashing lights out the back, all of these different, they may not all be in the store you go in, but there are 86,000 choices. You have to sort through 86,000 opportunities to pick one pair of athletic shoes, and that's a fact. Now, your conscious mind doesn't pick this up, but your subconscious does. And so there begins to be this constant stimulation. And then we find ourselves feeling overwhelmed and more stressed and tired. Something happened for you that you got interested in this thing called mindfulness. I've been practicing since 1971, practices that are called mindfulness practices. And I'm going to give you just a couple today. For a moment, take a deep breath with me. And the great news about these practices is you don't have to go sit in a lotus position for 30 minutes or 40 minutes and do anything. You can actually, the great thing about mindfulness is this is a way of living life. So we're just going to start with the breath. And guess what? You could take that breath. You could notice that you were breathing. You could notice, actually, if you really pay attention, you could notice the feeling of the air coming in your nostrils. You could feel the breath going down, way down to your belly if you took a deep breath. And bring that breath back up, and you could actually feel the breath coming out of your body. You could notice that you were breathing. And then you can notice that you can notice. So notice that you actually have a noticing faculty. You have a seeing faculty, and a hearing faculty, and a smelling faculty, and a tasting faculty. You can actually feel, but you also have a noticing faculty. So for a moment, notice the tip of your nose. Notice your right index finger. Notice your left kneecap. Notice the bottom of your right foot. Notice the tippy tip of all 10 toes. Notice your right cheek. Notice your left cheek. Notice your chin. Notice the tippy top of your head. Notice that you can notice. Now, mindfulness is choosing to be present to what you're noticing. And that's really the first step of mindfulness, is simply to notice that you're alive and notice that you can notice. As you begin to notice what you're noticing on a more regular basis, the next step in mindfulness practice is to notice if what you're noticing is empowering or disempowering, if it's expansive or contractive. So if I'm walking along the street and I'm noticing all of the hustle and the bustle and the sound, and I'm noticing all the people marching by and I'm getting bumped by other people and I start to feel irritated, and now I'm noticing that I'm irritated, and I'm noticing the hustle and the bustle, and I'm noticing the weather, and I'm noticing, if I can notice that I'm noticing, I can notice that I'm in a contractive mind. I can be mindful of what I'm doing with my thinking that's producing a contracted or constricted experience. And just like that, I can turn that around. And I can just simply practice moving towards noticing that I have the power in this moment. I have the power in this moment, just like Marcus Aurelius said. I can't control everything about me, but by golly, I can control exactly what I'm going to be thinking about. And I can be noticing I'm taking a step forward here, and there are people all around me. I can notice that I'm breathing and I'm not on a machine. I can notice that I have life coursing through my body. And here I am in this moment of life, a moment I will never have again, not in eternity. This is my moment. And notice the upward trend of those thoughts in our experience. The power of mindfulness is this is your one sacred birth. This is your one life. You will never have this day of your life again in eternity. And your particular life book that had a blank page when you came in, and then there was a birth date written upon it. And every single day of your life up to now, every single day has been a page of your life. And if it was a day of frustration and irritation, if it was a day of wonder and gratitude, you wrote those pages. Life didn't write those pages, you did. Life and you poured through you to create the results that are yours up to now. Something's happening in you where you're interested in mindfulness. And I believe that that something is the part of you that actually brought you here. The part of you that wants to live a life that's more expansive and fun and freedom-making. And maybe circumstances and situations have convinced you that they're bigger or stronger than you. But you found your way here, and I think there's a reason, and I don't think it's an accident. And it's not a coincidence. So I'm speaking to the part of you that knows this, the part of you that wants to go forward, and the part of you that really can. So practice noticing what you're noticing. And the pages that you write between now and that place out there in invisible ink when the last page of your book is there, just like it'll be for me, we will turn around and we'll go, all those days between now and then have been lived better, have been lived well, have been lived in mindfulness, in appreciation. This moment is my moment, and I choose who I'm going to be in this moment. I'm grateful you came today. I'm grateful for your interest in mindfulness. If you have a few more minutes, I'm going to share a story. But even if you can't stay around for a few more minutes, then go ahead and accept the free resource that I've prepared for you on this page. Because inside that resource are some really simple but highly effective things for helping you, starting right now, living a life you love living. And all you have to do is click the link below. But if you have a few more minutes, I'll share a story about mindfulness. There was a man named Alexander Papaderos who had created a peace training, an average person peacemaker training. And he built that on the island of Crete in Greece. I've been very involved in different kinds of things over 40 years that I've been working in transformation. Had the privilege of working with Martin Luther King's children and Gandhi's grandchildren and creating a season for nonviolence, and we launched that at the United Nations in 1998 on the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Mahatma Gandhi. It was a privilege to stand with his grandchildren and Martin Luther King's children and share what these two men had stood for and how they practiced nonviolence as a way of changing society and changing our world. And I got interested in ordinary people doing acts that helped our world be a more peaceful place. So one of my friends shared with me one time, he was a famous author and writer, you may have heard of him, Robert Fulghum. He wrote the book, Everything I Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. And he and I were doing an event one time together, and we were sitting backstage and talking, and he said, "Did I tell you that I went to the 2-week training with Alexander Papaderos in Greece?" And I said, "No, I didn't know you went." He said, "Oh my gosh, it was amazing. Let me tell you about it." He said, "Mary, ever since I was a little boy, I had this interest in what is the meaning of life. As I grew older, I began to ask other people what they thought was the meaning of life. In college, at the end of the semester, and the professor would say, 'Are there any final questions?' I would raise my hand and say, 'Yeah, what's the meaning of life?' And people would laugh and pick up their books and leave." He said, "I went to this 2-week training with Alexander Papaderos, well into his 80s. This is the last training he was going to deliver, and I made sure I got inside that training. There were only 50 of us that got accepted. At the end of the 2 weeks, Alexander Papaderos, who'd been training ordinary people who wanted to bring peace to our world for over 40 years, he looked around the room of 50 of us, and he said, "Are there any final questions?" And I raised my hand. And he called upon my hand. I put my hands back on the desk, and he said, "What's your question?" I said, "Dr. Papaderos, what is the meaning of life?" And Papaderos said, people started to laugh and pick up their books, and he says, "No, sit down. I believe Robert means his question, and I will answer your question as best I know." Then he said, "When I was a young boy, I was about 12 years old, when Nazi Germany began to overtake our island. The Germans had invaded Greece, and now they were invading our island. And the Germans were marching toward where we were. My older brothers and their friends were fighting the Germans, many of them injured now, some died. And young men that looked very much like people we could have been friends with are now our enemy. And the Germans are overtaking the island. And there was a border now where it was Germany on half our island and it was still Greece on the other part of our island. And I noticed that the birds could fly back and forth across that border. They knew nothing about this man-made border. It was a very sad time. I went around the corner one day and there was the ambush that had happened of our guys ambushing a German who was riding on his motorcycle. They ambushed him. I don't know what happened to him or the rest of his motorcycle. They were just pieces. But the rear view mirror of that motorcycle was smashed and on the ground. And I tried to put the whole thing back together again. And I didn't have all the pieces. Some of them were crushed. I couldn't put the whole mirror back together. So I took the largest piece of mirror, just as a kid, and I started working it on a rock, on a rough rock, to turn it into a perfect sphere. A round, perfectly round mirror. And I started, as a kid, I'm 12 years old, I started to play with that mirror, and the light would bounce off the mirror, and I noticed that I could shine that light into dark places. And I got really good at holding the mirror in such a way that I could shine the light into dark places. It was a game for me at first, and then it began to be a way of life. And over time, I began to realize something. As I grew older, that particular war ended, others didn't. And I began to realize that every single one of us is a fragment of a mirror whose size and shape we do not know. But as a fragment of that mirror, every single one of us can hold ourselves in such a way that the light can move through our presence and shine in dark places. And he said, I do believe that is the meaning of life, that we are each here to take the light that we are given and shine it into any dark place. And Robert Fulghum said, at that moment, Papaderos reached in, took out his wallet, opened it up, and pulled out the mirror. And it was light streaming in, held it in such a way that the light then landed right on Robert Fulghum's folded hands on the desk. He'd ask a question, he'd ask his whole life, what is the meaning of life? We are all a fragment of a mirror whose size and shape we do not know. But as a fragment of that mirror, every one of us is part of a whole. And every one of us has light that we can shine into any situation, any time, any place. I'm glad you came today.